Today we will look at the game of first round of Alitbox Norway chess tournament between Tari Aryan, a Norway chess player, Norwegian, and Fabiano Caruana from the United States, the ranking favorite and the second player in the world. Tari played e4, Fabi played c5. In the candidates tournament, he played e5 for Rui Lopez. Knight d3, e6, d4, takes, knight to c6, diamond of Sicilian, knight to c3, queen to c7. Here, Tari played different options. He tried bishop to e3, which is the most popular move, and also he played g4, which is a more aggressive move. And in this tournament, played g3, very solid. Continuation for fianchetting his bishop on g2 and basically keeping very solid position. a6, protecting b5. For instance, if here white tries instead of g3, knight to b5, then queen goes to b8, and then gaining tempo on this knight with a6. So that is why white is not trying this kind of play. So a6, bishop g2, knight f6, castles. Here black has a lot of options, but as long as white has already castled, this standard bishop to b4 is not very dangerous for white, because this knight is not pinned, obviously. So if he plays bishop to e7, then white can play something like rook to e1, and at some point threatening taking the knight and d5. For instance, castles, takes e5, knight to d5, and this position is a little bit dangerous for black, as you can see. White can go queen to g4, and as this pawn is protected, and he can create all kind of threats against the black's king. So Fabi takes, queen takes, bishop to c5, and Aryan plays bishop to f4, attacking the queen. d6, queen to d2, h6. So it's important. Black wants to play e5. Let's say if he castles, then white can attack this knight, and without this bishop on e7, which is standard, then he can threat with doubling the pawns, and then white is has very good position. So before that he plays h6 to prevent, rook to d1, attacking the pawn on d6, e5, pawn is protected, knight to e3, bishop to e3, bishop to e3, and takes with the pawn. Otherwise, if he takes with the queen, then this pawn is not anymore attacked by two pieces. So he takes with the pawn, bishop to e6, sacrificing this d6 pawn, backward pawn, because white doesn't have a very good option to protect it. If he plays, let's say, something like this, then this is a threat, and forking the queen and king. So basically this a little bit forced, but Fabi had it prepared. So he plays bishop to e6, takes, rook to c8, protecting the queen and putting pressure on the c file. a4. This move was made like from general calculations, and Fabi plays h5, gaining space on the queen side. h3, otherwise h4 is a threat, and opening this line on the for his rook. So h3, and if black plays h4, then g4, and white is better. So queen takes, rook takes, knight to d7. At this point, the idea of black at some point can to sacrifice an exchange. If black plays like this, then this position is better, is not better, but about equal. Yeah, because this black's knight is extremely strong on c5, and he can attack all the different directions. King to e7. Now, after queens are exchanged, king can stay in the center. Rook back, knight to b6, aiming for this c4 square. Knight d5, and Fabi takes with the bishop, because he's a pawn down. This bishop here is not the best bishop, because he is blocked by his own pawns, and when you pawn down, you want to have more complicated position. So bishop to d5 actually much better than knight to knight takes d5, for instance. This position is much better for white, yeah, because at some point white can exchange these bishops and have an extra pawn. So takes, knight to c4, attacking the rook, protecting the pawn, and knight to d6, a very nice square for the knight. It's blocking this d5 pawn, which blocks the bishop, and again knight has a lot of perspective here. Yeah, he can support f5, he can jump on e4, and so he really does a great job. e4, a5, stopping all the activities of white on the queen side. Rook to a1, rook to c4. Now black also wants to double rooks and create threats to c2 pawn. c3, f6. The idea is to play g5, and if white takes, f takes g, and black will have very important pass pawn on the king side. Rook to e3, rook to c8, king to f2, g5. Well, even though black is pawn down, they have initiative, and they can play with rooks and create all kind of threats all over the board, and white pieces are quite passive. Bishop to f3, g4. Again, this move doesn't mean that black will not have a pass pawn anytime soon. They will play f5 and then threaten this g3 pawn with his knight. So bishop back. Rook back, otherwise he will have a tempo on f1. Anyways, he plays bishop f1, f5, breaking through in the center, takes, and black takes the pawn on d5 finally. Rook here, rook to c5. Now white has again an extra pawn, but this pawn on f5 will be taken soon by black. Fabi doesn't want to take rook himself. He wants to keep at least one active rook in the center. Rook a d1. He has to take now. Takes. d4. It's very good that black has this pawn on the white squares, because it limits the white square bishop of white. Bishop e2. Much better was to play bishop to c2, creating counterplay. Yeah, for instance, if takes is checked, then he can go here. Let's say check here, takes, and this position might be still playable for white. Tari is in time trouble, and he plays a little bit passively. He plays bishop to e2, takes, bishop to b5. White cannot threat this h5 square, but if he pushes the king forward, so he will have this tempo on e8. Knight to d6, protecting e8 square. Bishop back, because it was attacked 2 times by rook and knight. Now king moves up, rook to c1, king up, and this position is already winning for black. Yeah, because he has this pass pawn, very strong pass pawn in the center, and he has his pieces much more active than white's pieces. White doesn't have anything to attack. He can't play b5 because this rook is pinned. If he plays with the king to e3, then knight f5 checking, and he has to retreat. So he waits, rook to c7, waits again, plays b6, protecting his a5 pawn, bishop to a6, rook to f7, rook back, gaining tempo. So white is in some kind of zugzwang. He plays rook to b1, knight f5, threatening check on e3, b4, check, goes back, bishop, knight to d5, attacking this c3 square. Very unpleasant position, protects, attacks. For instance, if he plays c4, then knight takes b4, winning. Yeah, so Fabi is controlling this file, c file, all the game. Takes, c4, knight to b4, rook to b1, and king gets through on d4, because before that the d4 square was protected by c pawn, but as long as white was so passive, he had to play, he wanted to play like to create pass pawn, so he gives up this d4 square for the king. Rook to b5, I'm sorry, rook c5. So if takes, then knight takes, and this pawn is weak, so he takes with the bishop, takes, he can take the rook, because he will just take back, and he will lose this pawn and this pawn, so black will be winning. Queen takes, takes, rook b1, and cutting off the queen, the king on f2, and Tari resigned. Okay, very nice game by Fabi. and thank you.